Bernard Montgomery, one of Britain's most renowned generals, rose to prominence through his meticulous, disciplined approach to warfare. Known as Monty, he played a pivotal role in the Allied victory during World War II, especially in North Africa and Europe. His leadership style, while effective, was controversial due to his rigid, uncompromising nature. This personality, alongside his military brilliance, created a complex legacy that continues to provoke debate. Bernard Law Montgomery was born on November 17, 1887, in Kennington, Surrey, England, into a religiously devout family. His father, Henry Montgomery, was an Anglican priest who later became the Bishop of Tasmania, a move that profoundly shaped young Montgomery's formative years. The rough, rural landscapes of Tasmania instilled in him a sense of resilience and self-reliance. His mother, Maud Farrer, was strict and disciplinarian, contributing to a strained family life that left Montgomery emotionally detached, a trait that would later define his relationships throughout his career. Montgomery's schooling in St. Paul's School and later at the Royal Military College, Sandhurst, marked the beginning of his military ambitions. Although he was almost expelled from Sandhurst for his rebellious behavior, he graduated in 1908 and was commissioned into the Royal Warwickshire Regiment. His early postings in India and later in Ireland during the Anglo-Irish War exposed him to the complexities of military leadership and discipline. However, it was World War I that truly shaped his character as a soldier and leader. Montgomery saw action early on in the war, but his military career really ended at the First Battle of Ypres in 1914, where he was shot through the right lung by a sniper. Left for dead, Montgomery lay motionless to avoid further fire. Miraculously, he survived, though his recovery took months. His near-death experience deeply influenced his cautious approach to warfare in the future, emphasizing detailed planning and minimizing unnecessary casualties. As the war progressed, Montgomery quickly advanced through the ranks, distinguishing himself in Flanders, and during the Battle of Arras, he ended the war as a Chief of Staff in the 47th 2nd London Division, having earned several decorations for his leadership and bravery. His experiences during World War I instilled in him a fierce commitment to military discipline and preparation, a philosophy that would dominate his leadership style throughout his career. After the war, Montgomery continued his ascent through the military hierarchy, commanding various infantry brigades and later serving in the Palestine campaign during the Arab Revolt. His methodical, uncompromising approach to discipline often alienated his colleagues, but his efficiency in maintaining order and readiness earned him a reputation as a capable leader. By the time World War II began, Montgomery had established himself as a disciplined, methodical, and highly efficient officer. His early wartime service included commanding a division in France during the Battle of Dunkirk, where he successfully organized the evacuation of British troops in the face of advancing German forces. His tactical brilliance during the evacuation solidified his position as one of Britain's leading generals, paving the way for his next great challenge, the North African Campaign. In August 1942, Bernard Montgomery took command of the 8th Army during the Western Desert Campaign, a crucial turning point in the war. His arrival in North Africa was timely. The British forces had suffered a string of defeats, and morale was low. Montgomery's appointment came at a time when the German Afrika Corps, led by the legendary General Erwin Rommel, was advancing toward Egypt, threatening the British control of the Suez Canal. Montgomery's first order of business was to instill discipline and restore confidence in his troops. He meticulously planned his counteroffensive, refusing to be rushed into battle by outside pressures. His strategy paid off at the Second Battle of El Alamein in October 1942. The battle was a decisive victory for the British and marked a turning point in the North African campaign. Rommel's forces were forced into retreat, and Montgomery's reputation as a brilliant tactician was cemented. His emphasis on preparation and minimizing casualties became hallmarks of his leadership, although it sometimes led to tensions with more aggressive Allied commanders, particularly the Americans. Following the victory in North Africa, Montgomery led the 8th Army through the Sicilian Campaign in 1943, alongside General George S. Patton. Though the campaign was successful, tensions between the two generals were palpable. Montgomery's methodical approach often clashed with Patton's more aggressive style, leading to rivalry that would persist throughout the war. Despite these personal conflicts, the campaign achieved its objectives, and the Allies continued their advance into Italy. Montgomery's crowning achievement came in 1944, when he was appointed to lead the ground forces during Operation Overlord, the Allied invasion of Nazi-occupied France. The D-Day landings on June 6, 1944, were the largest amphibious assault in history and the pivotal moment in the war. Montgomery's meticulous planning and coordination with General Dwight D. Eisenhower were crucial to the operation's success, although his cautious nature sometimes frustrated his American counterparts. After the successful landings, Montgomery's forces spearheaded the liberation of France, driving the Germans back toward their homeland. However, his career was not without setbacks. The ill-fated Operation Market Garden in September 1944, a bold attempt to capture key bridges in the Netherlands and secure an Allied route into Germany, ended in failure. The operation, which Montgomery had personally championed, resulted in heavy Allied casualties and a significant blow to his reputation. Despite the failure of Market Garden, Montgomery's leadership remained critical during the final stages of the war. During the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944, the last major German offensive of the war, Montgomery's forces helped stabilize the northern front, preventing the Germans from breaking through Allied lines. His role in coordinating the defense, alongside American forces, was instrumental in repelling the German attack. As the war drew to a close, Montgomery's 21st Army Group played a key role in the final push into Germany. On May 4, 1945, Montgomery accepted the unconditional surrender of the German forces in northern Germany, Denmark, and the Netherlands. It was a moment of triumph for a general whose methodical, disciplined approach had helped turn the tide of the war in Europe. Montgomery's career skyrocketed after his decisive victory at the Second Battle of El Alamein, where his leadership turned the tide against the Germans in North Africa. His role in Operation Overlord and the Normandy landings further solidified his reputation. Yet, the failed Operation Market Garden marked one of his greatest setbacks, casting a shadow over his otherwise stellar performance. Despite these challenges, Montgomery remained a key figure in the Allied advance across Europe, culminating in the surrender of German forces in 1945. After World War II, Montgomery continued to serve in prominent military roles. He was appointed Chief of the Imperial General Staff in 1946, the highest professional position in the British Army. His tenure, however, was marked by controversy. Montgomery's autocratic leadership style and inability to navigate post-war military politics created friction within the Army's upper echelons. His blunt criticisms of American military strategy during the war also strained his relationships with key Allied figures, including Eisenhower. Despite these challenges, Montgomery's influence on global military strategy remained significant. In 1951, he became the Deputy Supreme Allied Commander of NATO, playing a key role in shaping the military alliance's strategic defense during the early years of the Cold War. His contributions to NATO were invaluable, as his experience in organizing large-scale military operations during World War II gave him unique insights into coalition warfare and defense planning. Montgomery retired from active military service in 1958, but remained a vocal commentator on military affairs. He published several books, including his memoirs, where he reflected on his career and offered candid assessments of his fellow commanders. His critiques of Eisenhower and Patton, among others, stirred controversy, but they also provided a rare glimpse into the mind of one of the most successful and disciplined generals of the 20th century. Montgomery's personal life was marked by solitude. After the death of his wife, Betty Carver, in 1937, he never remarried, focusing entirely on his military career and his son, David Montgomery. His relationship with his son was often distant, reflecting the emotional detachment that had characterized much of his life. Montgomery's interactions with his subordinates and peers were often similarly aloof, though he inspired deep loyalty among the troops under his command. In his later years, Montgomery lived a quiet life in the English countryside, though he remained active in public life, frequently giving speeches and attending military functions. He passed away on March 24, 1976, at the age of 88, leaving behind a complex legacy. While his leadership of World War II was instrumental in the Allied victory, his personality often overshadowed his accomplishments, making him a divisive figure in military history. Despite his flaws, Bernard Montgomery's contributions to the Allied war effort were undeniable. His ability to inspire his troops, his meticulous planning, and his refusal to compromise on key strategic decisions helped secure critical victories in both North Africa and Europe. Montgomery's legacy endures as one of Britain's greatest military leaders, a soldier whose discipline, dedication, and determination changed the course of history.
All right, ready to dig in. Today, we're diving deep into the life of Bernard Montgomery. We're not just talking about battles and strategies, though.
No, not at all.
We're going beyond the history books to understand the man, the leader, the legend.
He's often remembered as this strict, almost unapproachable figure. Overly cautious, some might say.
Right, but there's got to be more to it than that.
Yeah.
This was a man entrusted with leading armies in the largest war in history.
Exactly, and that's what we're going to uncover today. What made Montgomery tick? What shaped him into the leader he became?
Well, Chapter 1 throws us right into his childhood. It wasn't exactly typical, especially for a future military giant.
Not typical at all. I mean, his father becomes the Bishop of Tasmania.
Yeah, not your usual military pedigree. Talk about a contrast.
Makes you wonder how young Bernard ended up on the path to becoming a field marshal.
It really does. And it wasn't just where he was raised, Tasmania, as you said, but how he was raised, too. His mother was, well, let's just say, incredibly strict.
Very strict, very disciplined.
Combine that upbringing with the rugged Tasmanian landscape, and you can almost see how those early years molded him.
Absolutely. You can practically see those early years shaping his personality, his leadership style. That need for control, the meticulous planning, those weren't just quirks. They were survival mechanisms, honed from a young age.
It's amazing how those formative experiences stick with us.
They really do.
And speaking of tough times, Chapter 1 also delves into Montgomery's time at Sandhurst, the Royal Military College.
Yes, Sandhurst.
The breeding ground for British military leaders.
A tough place to cut your teeth.
To say the least. And get this, he almost got expelled. Can you imagine?
It's true. This legendary figure almost kicked out. I mean, it does make you wonder what he got up to.
Right. Almost expelled from Sandhurst to eventually commanding entire armies. Talk about a turnaround. But then World War I erupts. And things get really interesting, especially that moment during the First Battle of Ypres that the book highlights.
Oh, absolutely. 1914, Montgomery, a young officer at the time, and a sniper.
Shot right through the lung.
Right through the lung. They left him for dead on the battlefield.
Left for dead. It's hard to even fathom. To come that close to death, it must have had a profound impact, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally.
Absolutely. It's a defining moment in his life.
Yeah.
And I think this is where we really start to see the roots of his legendary caution.
It makes sense, though, having stared death in the face like that, to experience the sheer chaos and brutality of war firsthand.
You come out changed, forever changed. And for Montgomery, that meant never taking unnecessary risks, especially with the lives of his men at stake.
So when people later criticized him for being overly cautious, they were missing the point.
Exactly. This wasn't just about maps and strategies. It was about protecting the lives of those under his command. He'd seen firsthand the cost of carelessness, of recklessness.
So we go from near death in the trenches of World War I to 1942 North Africa. The stakes couldn't be higher. Rommel, the desert fox, is on the move.
Rommel, a brilliant military mind, and he was running circles around the Allied forces. British morale was at rock bottom. They needed a victory, desperately.
And that's where Montgomery enters the picture.
Enter Montgomery. He's brought in to take command of the 8th Army.
And it's not just about fighting the Germans at this point, is it?
Not at all. He's fighting an enemy just as dangerous. Despair.
And this is where his leadership shines, wouldn't you say? The Second Battle of El Alamein.
A pivotal moment in the war.
Not just a victory.
A turning point.
This is Montgomery at his finest. What was it about his leadership, his approach, that allowed him to succeed where others had failed?
Well, for one, you have Rommel, this master of mobile warfare, known for his tactical brilliance.
The Desert Fox.
And Montgomery outmaneuvered him.
Completely.
All that meticulous planning, the discipline he was known for, his grasp of logistics, it all came together at El Alamein. He understood that battles weren't just won on the front lines. They were won by making sure the supplies got through, that the tanks were in the right place at the right time.
He didn't just beat Rommel. He out-organized him, which, when you think about Rommel's reputation, is really saying something.
It was a pivotal moment for the Allied forces, a much-needed victory, a sign that Rommel and the German army weren't invincible.
Right, a glimmer of hope when things were looking pretty bleak.
And Montgomery, whether he liked it or not, became a symbol of that hope. Here was a leader who could stand up to the German army, who could beat them at their own game.
But El Alamein was just the beginning. So we left off with this incredible victory at El Alamein, a turning point in the war. But it was far from over, right? What's next for Montgomery?
Well, after North Africa, the focus shifts to liberating Europe. And Montgomery, having proven himself as a strategist, as a leader, he's a key figure in planning the largest amphibious invasion in history.
D-Day.
D-Day, June 6, 1944.
The sheer scale of D-Day, even now, it's mind-boggling.
Hundreds of thousands of troops, landing craft, air support.
It's almost unimaginable.
It's a massive undertaking, and Montgomery, with his meticulous planning.
It's like everything he had done, all those years of planning, all those maps, all those charts, were leading up to this moment.
This was his element. This is where he thrived.
You can almost picture him in those hours leading up to the landings. I mean, what must have been going through his mind?
Well, he was known for his composure, even under immense pressure. But, the weight of responsibility, the lives that hung in the balance.
And, of course, D-Day was a success.
A turning point in the war.
But it wasn't without its challenges. And I'm thinking specifically about Operation Market Garden.
Market Garden. Ambitious, daring, but ultimately it fell short of its goals.
What was the objective there? Remind us.
The plan was to capture a series of bridges in the Netherlands, to open up a route straight into Germany, potentially ending the war sooner.
A gamble.
It was a calculated risk, for sure.
Relying heavily on airborne forces.
Thousands of paratroopers dropped behind enemy lines. The idea was they'd hold those bridges until ground forces could arrive. The Germans put up more resistance than anticipated. The operation, it relied on speed, on surprise, and it got bogged down.
The fighting was fierce.
Heavy casualties.
So Market Garden, ultimately a setback for Montgomery. Strategically, but I imagine personally as well.
He faced criticism, yes. Some questioned his judgment. But war is unpredictable.
Chaotic.
Even the most brilliant commanders, they can make mistakes.
Especially when you're dealing with incomplete intelligence, an unpredictable enemy. So, despite this setback, Montgomery, he remains a crucial figure in the final push towards Germany.
Oh, absolutely. Key figure in the Allied command. And when the Germans launched their last major counteroffensive, the Battle of the Bulge,
Desperation.
Montgomery's forces were instrumental in holding the line, stabilizing the northern front.
This is where his experience, his understanding of defensive strategy really comes into play, doesn't it?
Absolutely. He had learned his lessons from World War I about holding firm, about choosing your battles carefully, and that proved crucial in those final months of the war.
It's incredible to think about Montgomery's journey, from those early days in Tasmania to leading armies on the world stage. But as they say, all good things must come to an end. What did peacetime hold for a man who seemed so defined by war?
Well, retirement didn't exactly suit Montgomery, at least not in the traditional sense. In 1946, he becomes chief of the Imperial General Staff.
The top spot in the British Army. You'd think he would have been welcomed with open arms after his wartime service. But it sounds like his personality, his leadership style, didn't exactly translate to peacetime.
You've got to remember, this was a man used to command, used to having the final say. Peacetime, it requires a different skill set. Diplomacy, collaboration, political maneuvering.
Not exactly Montgomery's strong suits.
Let's just say he wasn't known for mincing words.
That famous bluntness.
He clashed with politicians, ruffled more than a few feathers within the army itself.
And he was openly critical of American military strategy.
Which didn't exactly make him popular with his former allies.
No, probably not. It makes you wonder, did he ever regret his approach? Did he ever think, maybe I could have handled that differently? Or did he truly believe that his way was the only way?
It's hard to say for sure, but he never seemed to back down from his convictions. Even as times changed, his belief in his own methods never wavered.
So, bit of a mixed bag in peacetime.
Yeah.
But his expertise, his experience, it was still sought after. He was involved in NATO, wasn't he?
Absolutely. 1951, he becomes the Deputy Supreme Allied Commander of NATO.
Quite a shift from battling Rommel in the desert.
From fighting the Germans to shaping the West's strategy against the Soviet Union.
A whole new kind of battlefield.
Exactly. And Montgomery's experience in building and commanding large-scale forces, it was invaluable to NATO, especially in those early years of the Cold War. It was a different kind of conflict, but that strategic mind was still an asset.
What a fascinating career arc. But eventually, even Montgomery had to step down. When did he finally retire from public life?
He officially retires from active service in 1958.
1958.
But true to form, he didn't exactly fade into obscurity.
I can only imagine. What did he do? Write his memoirs?
He wrote several books, including his memoirs, which, shall we say, caused quite a stir.
I bet. What kind of bombshells did he drop?
Let's just say his assessments of his fellow commanders, particularly Eisenhower and Patton, were rather frank.
Oh, to be a fly on the wall.
Those memoirs sparked their fair share of controversy, but they also offer a fascinating glimpse into Montgomery's mindset.
That unwavering self-belief.
You got it.
Sounds like he was a force to be reckoned with until the very end. Well, as we wrap up this deep dive into Montgomery's life, what's the biggest takeaway for you? How should we remember this complex and often contradictory figure?
It's easy to get caught up in the personality, the ego, the bluntness, that unyielding nature.
Right.
But I think it's important to remember the why behind the man. His experiences, especially that near-death experience in World War I, it left an indelible mark.
He wasn't just a general moving pieces on a map.
No.
He was a man who had seen the horrors of war firsthand.
Who understood the true cost of war.
He was meticulous, demanding, yes, but also deeply committed to the well-being of his men.
He carried the weight of their lives on his shoulders.
And did everything in his power to bring them home safely. Well, listeners, that's something to think about, isn't it? We've explored the life of Bernard Montgomery, a man who was brilliant, flawed, and undeniably consequential. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep with us.
Post-war, Montgomery's influence continued as he took on key military roles, such as Chief of the Imperial General Staff and NATO Deputy Commander. Although his leadership style created tensions, particularly with his American counterparts, his contributions to military strategy were undeniable. Montgomery's death in 1976 marked the end of an era, yet his legacy remains that of a brilliant, yet polarizing, military figure whose discipline and strategy were crucial in securing Allied victories during World War II.